Hello, hello, welcome back. This is Shields. Hope you're doing well. Today we are going to react to why couldn't the Romans conquer Ireland? So, I think this is going to be an interesting video because first off, the Roman Empire is one of the biggest talking points in history, and the Roman Empire, of course, lasted for about till the midway through the fifth century, AD or BCE or not BCE, CE, my bad. And just looking here on this map, you can see like the origins of, well, not the origins, but some parts of the Roman Empire here. Eventually, it splits the west and east, but then, of course, it takes the entire Mediterranean into the French and Germanic areas, all the way through the British Isle, all the way, almost kind of slightly into Scotland and its most uh, advantageous place in history, but never so on the Irish Isle. I'm not sure why. I can have assumptions like the sea, um, very deep, very difficult passage. A lot easier to go from, you know, the French coast to the British coast. Not so easy from the British coast to the Irish coast. That's my assumption. I also assume that the Irish tribes may have been a little bit difficult to interact with, and they weren't assimilating as easy when it comes to giving up certain resources. Now, that's another assumption. The other assumption could be like they just didn't have an interest in it. They didn't feel like it was a strategic play, or it could be a resourcing issue, because this was a huge empire. This was not your backyard empire. This thing was huge. From Egypt to, what do you call it? From Egypt to British Isles, huge. So I don't know what else to say. If you're new here, like I said, my name's Shields. Hope you're doing well. We do lots of things around history, humanities, culture, and this is part of it. This is part of our shared culture, the Roman Empire. So let's see why they couldn't conquer Ireland.
Rome conquer Ireland. At its height, the Roman Empire held most of Europe, from the Atlantic coast to the Caspian Sea, but it never took the island of Hibernia, or as you may know it,
Ireland.
Ireland. A great deal of Rome's territorial conquests came not in the time when it was an empire, but when it was the Republic. And this Republic's expansion through Western Europe was done
So pre-Caesar.
rather quickly. Before the Punic Wars, 264 to 146 BCE, Rome had little considered expansion outside of the Italian peninsula, and they hadn't even fully conquered that, as it repeatedly
So they had a huge battle continuously to the Sicilian island with Carthage. As Carthage was pretty much they were the Mediterranean boss at this point.
defeated Carthage. Rome won more territory. First, the island of Sicily, then Corsica and Sardinia, then parts of North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula. By 146 BCE, in addition to the territories taken from Carthage, Rome also held Greece and Macedonia, and had made inroads into the Middle East. After the war was over, they established the first Gallic Roman province in 121 BCE, in the area known as Provence. Within a couple of
Province known as Provence. That's interesting.
decades, the Roman army was embroiled in a war to help their Gallic allies against the Germanic tribes of the Teutons and Ambrones. Trade expanded here, but the Romans were far too distracted with internal politics to consider invading this territory that would one day become France. This changed in 59 BCE, when Gaius Julius Caesar ended his consulship and arranged to be named the general in charge of conquering Gaul. Thus
Came, I saw, conquered.
began the Gallic Wars, which by the end of the decade brought Gaul under Roman rule. Caesar had an opportunity to push further across the English Channel to Britannia. He made
Such an unknown too. Like imagine, like you see this vast ocean, because you can't really. I mean, it depends on the visibility. You can't really see across the English Channel, can you? Imagine you can. Maybe you can. Maybe I'm crazy. But imagine like what is the foresight here? Like, it's an unknown land. Have you scouted it? I'm sure you've had some sort of scouting. Insurmountable, I think.
Made two invasions, the first in the late summer of 55 BCE, and the second the next year. The first was largely unsuccessful. Storms wrecked some of his ships, and large groups of Britons prevented the remaining ones from easily landing. The second invasion was informed by the first, the most important lessons being to start with a larger force and have regularly scheduled supply shipments. They also set out much earlier in the summer. In response, the Britons came together under the warlord Cassivellaunus, who led them in guerrilla tactics, harassing Caesar's men, knowing they could not defeat them in a pitched battle. Still, the Roman army pushed on to the Thames River, which they found fortified with underwater stakes, and Cassivellaunus's men on the other side. They had done their best, but the Britons were no match for the Roman archers, and they soon retreated. Caesar found an ally in another tribe of Britons, the Trinovantes, who had recently been warring against Cassivellaunus. With this local help, the Britons were...
See, by the way, I'm just so intrigued right now because I do not know much about this war, this battle at all. I'm not too even keen on the Londinium tribes and peoples here. So some of these names are foreign to me. I think I've heard of the Trinovantes. I've heard of them before. I think they actually originated a little bit more towards like Polish, like towards the Poland area. Not too sure. I think that's right, but yeah, this is
forced to surrender. Caesar made arrangements for tribute, but left no soldiers to enforce them. He had not intended to fully conquer Britannia with this venture, but to cut off potential support to the Gauls, and to show the Britons what they could expect should they decide to cross the Channel and get involved in wars against Rome. By the time Caesar returned to Rome from his Gallic conquests, a civil war was brewing. By its end, the Roman Republic had given way to the Roman Empire, now under the leadership of an emperor rather than the Senate and people. It took until the mid-30s CE for the Romans to give serious consideration to returning
Caligula is now who we're talking about.
to Britannia. The Emperor Caligula led an expedition in 40 CE, but was stopped by Neptune, because he believed that they had argued, and the god of the sea refused to allow his men to cross.
Okay. We'll go with that.
Caligula ordered his soldiers to wade into the water and attack it, until he declared Neptune was retreating and they had won.
Okay.
The emperor then called off the invasion.
That's a
and
crazy
instead
looking ship.
had his men collect pretty seashells and rocks from the shore as their spoils of war. Despite the failure of this attempt, the military leadership had made good plans for the invasion and subjugation of the island, which could be used by the next emperor,
Claudius.
along with some of his own making, to finally bring Britannia fully under Roman control. The defeat of the warlord Caratacus in 43 CE and making Britannia a Roman province was the crowning achievement of Emperor Claudius's reign. It would not have been unreasonable for the Romans to have continued across to take the rest of the British Isles, but this was not the case. There are a few reasons that Rome never conquered Ireland. First, the Britons did not bow down to Roman control quickly or meekly. The early governors of the province spent most of their time putting down rebellions, most notably the one led by Boudica, queen of the Iceni in 61 CE.
Yep.
These rebellions
Heard
were
of her.
ironically a reason to invade Ireland, as it could be used as a stronghold against the Romans in Britain, as Caesar had feared was being done in Britain for the Gauls. Imperial politics also played a major role. The Julio-Claudius dynasty collapsed under Claudius's successor,
Nero.
whose suicide prompted an 18-month period in which 4 men successively took control, and 3 lost it. Once the government was again stable, under the first of the Flavian emperors, Vespasian, some attention could be given to the British Isles. Vespasian and his
So much internal conflicts. I see. It's just a resourcing thing at this point.
successors largely chose good men to rule Britannia and left them to do their jobs. The best known of these is Gnaeus Julius Agricola, best known in part because of his accomplishments, but likely more due to the fact that his son-in-law, Publius Cornelius Tacitus, is one of the most important sources for Roman history of this period. If Rome was ever going to conquer Ireland, it would have been by Agricola, at the head of its legions. By the time of his governorship, 78 to 85 CE, the Britons had a few generations of Roman rule, and while there was still some small rebellions, the Romans were looking to expand beyond their few settlements in southwest England. They had pushed into Wales under Aulus Plautius, and moved northwest as well. Agricola spent much of his time as governor expanding into Caledonia.
So this is almost where I think they get a little bit more towards Scotland, and then it starts more or less like a retreat.
While conducting one of these expeditions, Agricola came to know an exiled Irish king, and both hoped to use the other for their own purposes. Agricola saw an opportunity in helping him to retake his throne, thereby creating an ally and removing Ireland as a haven for anti-Roman sentiment. The king would likely have been happy to have Roman help, even if it meant they would exact a tribute. Tacitus does not tell us the Irish king's name, but many believe it to have been the legendary king Tuala Tekmar, who was overthrown and exiled
See, this is so much history I don't know. You guys know about this?
around this time. Agricola's knowledge of the island, aside from whatever the king told him, would have been based on coastal surveys and information from merchants and traders. Whatever they told him, he wasn't terribly impressed. He told his son-in-law, a single legion with a few auxiliaries could conquer and occupy Ireland. He would likely also have read the work of Pomponius Mela, who said the island was of little use for growing grain.
So that's probably the one, like people didn't see, like, was it worth it?
But was excellent for livestock. It is so luxuriant with grass, not only abundant but sweet, that livestock stuff themselves in a fraction of the day, and unless they are kept from the pasture, they burst from feeding too long. For all that Mela found the grass worthy of praise, he did not extend any to the island's inhabitants, who he described as undisciplined and ignorant of all virtue, to a greater degree than any other nation, and they are very much inexperienced in piety. Given all of this, an invasion of Ireland made sense for the Romans. They expected it would require little effort, and they would be rewarded with the removal of a potential rebel sanctuary, and a place that could produce abundant hides for leather and vellum, if not also the meat. And so Agricola set up a camp in that part of Britain which looks toward Ireland, hoping for fresh conquests rather than fearing attack. Archaeologists have confirmed this, finding evidence of fortifications
That's really cool.
in this area, in addition to trade markets. Agricola's opportunity was lost, however, to rebellions in Scotland that demanded his full attention. By the time he had finished with these, his governorship had ended and he returned to Rome. And so the opportunity to bring Ireland into the Roman Empire was lost. But this does not mean there was no interaction between the Irish and the Romans. Trade had existed between Ireland and Britain long before any foreign conquests. This continued, and now included the Roman inhabitants of the island. Roman coins can be found all over Ireland, along with gold and silver Roman jewelry, and the remains of amphorae that held olive oils and wine. There is even a Roman-style grave near Stonyford Co, Kilkenny, making it seem likely that at least one Roman felt sufficiently at home in Ireland to be interred there.
Wow.
And as ever in the ancient world, there was also trade in the enslaved, both to and from Ireland. The most important element of these trade ties, however, was not the goods they bought and sold, but the information they passed. As Romans and Romanized Britons interacted with the Irish, they exchanged elements of culture, and just as power of Rome was beginning to wane in the British Isles, a relatively new belief system was becoming an important part of being Roman: Christianity.
Yep.
The Romans may have left Britannia at the end of the 4th century, but they left behind Roman Catholicism. And when, as of this writing, nearly 70% of the Irish identity as Catholic, we might say that Rome did conquer Ireland after all. Not
That's more or less. Wow, that's an interesting outlook right there.
with swords, but with ideas.
Wow, the ideology they put. I mean, you see this all over the world, whether it be in South America with Catholicism, whether it be Ireland Catholicism, whether it be India with Buddhism. It's and then eventually Hinduism. It's interesting. It's very interesting. Yeah, my original thoughts were that it was either going to be such a struggle with the sea, resourcing, and it really came down to resourcing and did it make sense to do it? I mean, it made more sense to go after the British Isles with the amount of people that, and it was more or less like, we're going to do this so they don't help out the Gauls. The Gallic Empire wouldn't have support. So it was kind of like, we're going to take away their ally. I see that. And then, like, there was no, like, they eventually could possibly, if this flooded another 100, 200, 300 years, they would definitely have went into the Irish Isles. Definitely. Who knows where the Romans would have stopped? Who knows? Would they have just kept going? Very interesting. If you guys made it this far, I implore you to hit that subscribe button, as I love reacting to these. So let me know if you have any suggestions. But yeah, that was why the Romans could not conquer Ireland. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Bye bye.